History of Life on Earth. The Unbroken Chain from the First Life to You. Chapter 8, On to Land. The Fish That Weren't Going Anywhere. 8.1 The story you were told is wrong. You know the picture. You have seen it 100 times on textbook covers and t-shirts and the back of cars. A fish hauling itself up out of the surf onto a bare beach, gasping, straining, dragging its body toward a new world. It is a wonderful image. It is also, in almost every particular, wrong. There was no bare beach. The land was already green, already crawling, already busy, a working ecosystem with forest and food webs, built by plants and insects that had been ashore for tens of millions of years and were doing perfectly well without us. The fish was not gasping. It had lungs and had had them for a very long time. Its ancestors had been breathing air in the water for ages before anything came ashore. And the fish was not straining toward anything. It was not escaping a drying pool, not seeking a new frontier, not aspiring to be a tetrapod. It was a fish in the water doing fish things. It had limbs with wrists and shoulders and eventually fingers, and it used them the way a fish uses fins, for pushing, propping, and shoving through weeds. It did not walk. It could not have walked. It was, from tail to snout, a superb aquatic predator that had absolutely no interest in leaving. This is the deepest lesson in this book, and this chapter is the place where the evidence for it is best preserved and hardest to argue with. The equipment for living on land was built in the water for reasons that had nothing to do with land. Lungs evolved in fish swamps for fish problems. Limbs with elbows evolved in fish underwater. Fingers evolved in fish underwater in an animal that could not support its own weight. A neck evolved in fish so an ambush predator lying in the shallows could snap sideways at a passing meal. Every single piece was already there. Not one of them was made for the purpose it now serves. Chapter 6 gave this a name, exaptation, a structure that evolves for one job and is later co-opted for another. This chapter is where the principle stops being a footnote and becomes the whole story. Evolution is not an engineer working toward a specification. It is a tinkerer working with whatever happens to be lying on the bench, and the results it produces are almost never designed for the use they eventually find. Nobody was going anywhere. And then, one day, something did. 8.2 A world already full. The Devonian ended roughly 359 million years ago, and the land it left behind was nothing like the sterile rock of earlier chapters. Plants got there first, and they built everything. They had crept ashore in the Ordovician and Silurian as low, mossy, unglamorous mats. By the mid-Devonian, they had roots and vascular tissue to move water upward. And by the late Devonian, there were trees, Archaeopteris, tall and branching, casting the first true forest shade the world had ever seen. And forests do things to a planet. Roots crack rock into soil. Leaves fall, rot, and make humus. Rain washes organic litter into the rivers. The whole chemistry and physics of the land surface changed, and the change was permanent. Arthropods followed the plants. Millipedes, early arachnids, the first insects. By the time any vertebrate was thinking about the shoreline, the land had a functioning food web. Plants at the bottom, detritivores chewing through the litter, predators hunting the detritivores. Which means the first tetrapod did not arrive in an empty world. It arrived at a buffet. Think about what was waiting there. Millions of years of terrestrial arthropods, soft, slow, and utterly unprepared. There had never been a large vertebrate predator on land. Nothing on that shore had evolved a single defense against being eaten by something with a spine and jaws, because nothing with a spine and jaws had ever been there. A vertebrate that could get up onto the bank, even briefly, even clumsily, was walking into a room where nobody knew how to run. The oxygen was rising, and the water was suffocating. Here is the crucial detail, and it turns the whole story inside out. The spread of forests changed atmospheric chemistry, and over the Devonian and into the Carboniferous, atmospheric oxygen climbed. Good news for anything breathing air. But look at what was happening in the water, specifically in the shallow, warm, weed-choked swamps and river margins where our fish lived. Those waters were flooded with dead plant matter washing in from the new forests. Bacteria decomposed it. Decomposition consumes oxygen, and warm water holds less dissolved oxygen to begin with. Those swamps were hypoxic. Suffocating. A fish living there was starving for oxygen in a world where the air just above the surface was richer in oxygen than it had ever been in the history of the planet. Read that again because it is the hinge of this entire chapter. The pressure to breathe air arose in the water. Not on land. Not in a drying pool. Not in some desperate flight from death. A fish in an oxygen-poor swamp that could poke its snout up and gulp a mouthful of air had a decisive advantage over one that couldn't every hour of every day, for its entire life, while completely submerged in its perfectly good aquatic home. Air breathing was not an escape from water. It was an adaptation to water. And the water was full of obstacles. These were not open oceans. They were shallow, weedy, root-tangled, debris-choked, half-submerged tangles. Terrible places to swim through, and excellent places to push through. A fin you can brace against the bottom, shove against a log, or use to lever yourself through a mat of vegetation is worth having. Underwater. In a swamp. For swamp reasons. Put those four facts together. A green land full of defenseless food, a rising oxygen atmosphere, a suffocating swamp, and a habitat you push through rather than swim through, and you have every selective pressure needed to build a tetrapod. None of them require dry land at all. 8.3 What the family already had. Chapter 7 established the punchline. Tetrapods are lobe-finned fish. Not descended from them, are them, in the strict logic of the tree, the way a bat is still a mammal. Two groups of lobe fins are still alive, and each one preserves a piece of the story. The coelacanth. The fish that came back from the dead, pulled from a South African trawler's catch in 1938, 80 million years after its lineage was supposed to have ended. It has fleshy, muscular, lobed fins with bones inside them. And here's the striking part. When a coelacanth moves those fins, it moves them in an alternating pattern, left front with right rear, right front with left rear. That is a walking gait. It is the exact rhythm of a lizard crossing a rock or a dog crossing a lawn. And a coelacanth is performing it in open water, hundreds of meters down, on fins, with no bottom under it and no intention whatsoever of ever touching land. The pattern of walking existed before walking did. The lungfish. 6 species survive in Africa, South America, and Australia, and by the molecular evidence, they are the closest living relatives of every land vertebrate on Earth. Your nearest fish cousin is a lungfish, and they breathe. Genuinely, obligately, in several species, an African lungfish held underwater and prevented from surfacing will drown. It is a fish that needs air. Better still. When the African dry season comes and the swamp begins to vanish, the lungfish burrows down into the mud, secretes a cocoon of mucus around itself, folds its tail over its head, drops its metabolism to a whisper, and waits. This is called estivation, and a lungfish can do it for months, in some accounts, years, breathing air in dried mud, in a hole, until the rains come back. Here is a living fish that survives the total disappearance of its own water by breathing air in the dirt. And it is not on its way to becoming anything. It has been doing this, unchanged, for a very long time. The lineage that would eventually stand up did not need to invent lungs, or fleshy limbs, or air breathing. It already had all three, and it had them underwater. 8.4 Lungs came first. Now the fact that flips most people's intuition upside down. Ask anyone how lungs evolved and you'll get the same answer. Fish have swim bladders, fish came onto land, the swim bladder became a lung. It's backward. Lungs are older. The swim bladder is the modification. The evidence from development, from anatomy, and from the distribution of the trait across the fish family tree points to a simple conclusion. The common ancestor of all bony fish, way back in the Silurian, had a lung. A simple sac budding off the gut, ventral, full of air, useful for exactly the reason we've already covered, because shallow water is often hypoxic, and gulping air works. From that ancestral air sac, the two great lineages went in opposite directions. The lobe fins kept it as a lung. They elaborated it, wrapped it in blood vessels, connected it to the heart circulation, and used it to breathe. Lungfish still have it. So do you. Your lungs are that same organ, in an unbroken line, refined for 400 million years. The ray fins turned it into a flotation device. In most of them, the tuna, the salmon, the goldfish, the 99%, the air sac migrated to the top of the body cavity, lost its respiratory role, and became a swim bladder, a buoyancy tank. Inflated slightly and the fish rises. Deflated in it sinks. It lets a fish hang motionless in the water column at any depth, spending no energy at all. That is a superb invention, and it is one of the great reasons ray-finned fish took over the water. And the intermediate forms are still swimming around. Gars, bowfins, and bitch ears, the old-fashioned ray-fins, have swim bladders that are still connected to the gut by an open duct, and they can still gulp air and use it for breathing. Not lungs, not quite, not pure swim bladders either. Both at once in a living animal. So the sequence runs the other way from the story everybody tells. The fish did not evolve lungs to come ashore. The fish already had lungs, and one lineage came ashore because of it. Your lungs are not a terrestrial invention. They are a fish organ that you inherited and never gave back. 8.51 bone, 2 bones, many bones. Hold your arm out and look at it. 1 bone, the humerus, running from your shoulder to your elbow. 2 bones, the radius and the ulna, running from your elbow to your wrist. Many bones, the little jumbled cluster of the wrist, and then the long bones of the palm, and then the fingers. Now look at a bat's wing. 1 bone, 2 bones, many bones, and then the fingers absurdly elongated, with skin stretched between them. A whale's flipper. 1 bone, 2 bones, many bones, fingers, inside a flipper. A horse's leg. A bird's wing. A mole's shovel. A frog's arm. Every one of them. 1 bone, 2 bones, many bones. Nothing about physics requires this. A wing does not need to be built this way. Neither does a flipper or a digging spade or a running leg. These are wildly different tools doing wildly different jobs, and there is no functional reason on Earth they should share a skeleton. They share it because they inherited it. This is homology, the same structure, from the same ancestor, modified. And this particular homology is the most famous in all of biology, because it is impossible to explain any other way. Nobody would design a whale's flipper by starting with a hand and then hiding it inside a paddle. Only history does that. So where does the pattern come from? It comes from a fish? Eusthenopteran, around 385 million years ago. A lobe-finned fish, unambiguously, a swimmer, a predator, a fish in every meaningful sense, with no digits and no capacity to bear weight on anything. And inside its fin, 1 bone, then 2 bones. A humerus, a radius and an ulna. The architecture of your arm was already there, in a Devonian fish being used to swim. 8.6 The Fishapod. In the late 1990s, a paleontologist named Neil Shubin and his colleagues did something that ought to be impossible if evolution were merely a story we tell about the past. They predicted where a fossil would be and went in and got it. The reasoning was straightforward. Eusthenopteran grade fish were around 385 million years old. The earliest known animals with true digits were around 365 million years old. Whatever lay between them should be somewhere around 375 million years old, and it should be in freshwater rock, since this transition happened in swamps and rivers, not in the sea. So they went looking for exposed Devonian freshwater sediment of exactly the right age, and found it on Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic, a frozen, treeless, savagely inhospitable place that just happened to have rocks of precisely the right age and type sitting at the surface. 4 expeditions. 6 years. Brutal field seasons in the Arctic. In 2004, they split a rock and found a flat head looking up at them. Tiktaalik roche, from an enunciated word for a large freshwater fish. It is about 375 million years old. It is up to 2 or 3 meters long. And it is the most famous transitional fossil found in the last half-century, because it is so obviously, so unarguably in between. What was fish about it? Scales, gills, and fin rays, the thin bony struts, called lepidotrichia, that make a fin. Tiktaalik had them. It had fins, not feet. It was a fish. What was not fish about it? A flat head with eyes on top. Not on the sides, where a fish's eyes go, on the roof of the skull, looking straight up. This is the face of an animal that lies on the bottom of shallow water and watches what swims over it. An ambush predator in a swamp. It also has a hint of something else. Eyes on top are only useful if you can occasionally get them near the surface and look out. A neck. Stop here, because people skim past this and it may be the most important item on the list. A fish cannot turn its head. Its shoulder girdle is bolted directly to the back of its skull, one continuous unit. So when a fish looks left, the entire fish goes left. There is no independent head. Tiktaalik's shoulder girdle has come loose from the skull. There is a gap. There are joints. The head can turn, tilt, and strike while the body stays where it is. That is a neck. It is the first one in the history of vertebrate life, and it was invented in the water, because an ambush predator lying on the bottom needs to snap sideways at prey without lunging its whole body forward and giving itself away. You have a neck because a fish needed to be sneaky. Ribs that could take a load, broad, overlapping, robust. Not the delicate rib struts of a fish that anchor swimming muscles, but a rib cage that could hold a body up against something pressing down on it, and the fin. Inside Tiktaalik's pectoral fin, a humerus, a radius and an ulna, and beyond them, a set of bones that form a functional wrist joint, a fin that could bend, take weight, and press against a surface. Not to walk. It could not walk. It still had fin rays and no fingers, and its hind limbs were feeble, but it could prop. It could push itself up on its front fins in shallow water, and lift its flat head to the surface. It could shove itself through mud and roots and tangles. Neil Shubin, who found it, gave it the nickname that stuck. A fishapod. A fish with a wrist. A fish that could do a push-up. 8.7 The eight-fingered fish. 10 million years later, in Greenland, the rocks hold something that finally has fingers. Acanthostega, about 365 million years old, and it is the single most instructive animal in this chapter, because it demolished 100 years of assumptions. It has true, unmistakable digits, fingers and toes, articulated, at the ends of genuine limbs. By every prior expectation, this should be a walking animal. This is the thing everyone had been waiting for. Fingers mean feet, and feet mean land. Except, its limbs were far too weak to hold up its body out of water. Look at the joints, the muscle attachments, the proportions. This animal could not have supported its own weight on land. It could not have walked. It would have been flattened by its own body, gasping on the mud. It had internal gills, real, functioning gills, in the back of its throat, with the skeletal architecture to support them. It was breathing water, and it had 8 fingers on each limb. Not 5. 8. Its contemporary, Ichthyostega, had 7, and was rather more robust, with a heavy barrel of a rib cage and forelimbs strong enough that it may have hauled itself along in the shallows and possibly onto a mud bank, in a laborious, sprawling, seal-like shuffle. Sit with the Acanthostega result for a moment, because it turns the entire narrative on its head. Fingers evolved underwater, in an animal that could not walk, that was still breathing through gills, and that was not going anywhere near land. So what were they for? They were for what fins had always been for, but better. Fingers spread the load and grip the substrate. An animal shoving its way through submerged root tangles and thickweed benefits enormously from a limb that can splay and hook rather than one that simply slices water. In a swamp full of obstacles, a hand is a better tool than a paddle. Fingers were invented for pushing through mud. Digits did not evolve for walking. Walking was found later in something that already had them. And the 5-fingered hand you're holding this book with, that wasn't the starting point either. It was one option among many. 8, 7, 6. The early tetrapods experimented, and only later did the lineage settle on 5 and lock it in so firmly that essentially every land vertebrate since, every lizard, bird, bat, whale, and human, is working from a 5-digit template, however disguised. There is no deep reason for 5. It is not optimal. It is not magic. It's just the number that happened to be on the winning hand when the door closed behind it. Your hand has 5 fingers because of an accident in a Devonian swamp. The sequence laid out. And then, read down that column and watch a fish become a tetrapod one feature at a time, over 20 million years, with each intermediate a perfectly functional animal that was not trying to become the next one. 8.8 The weight. And now, having gotten all this equipment for free, our animal encounters a problem it has never faced in 3 billion years of ancestry. It weighs something. In water, a vertebrate is essentially weightless. Its density is close to the water's, so gravity is cancelled and the body simply hangs, supported at every point in every direction. A fish's skeleton has never had to hold anything up. Its spine exists to resist the compression of side-to-side swimming, and that's all. Take that animal out of the water, and gravity arrives all at once everywhere. The body sags. The organs, which in water simply float in place, now press downward with their full weight, crushing the lungs beneath them. The spine, unsupported in the middle, and held up only at the ends, wants to fold. The limbs, which have been pushing gently against mud, must now support the entire mass of the animal against the ground while also moving it forward. Everything has to be rebuilt. The spine becomes a bridge. Fish vertebrae are essentially a row of blocks that resist being squashed. Tetrapod vertebrae grow interlocking projections, zygapophyses, that hook the vertebrae together, letting the column resist sagging while still bending in a controlled way. That is not a spine anymore. That's a suspension bridge, with the rib cage, and organs slung underneath it and the limbs as the piers, and you can watch it happen, vertebra by vertebra, through the fossil sequence. The pelvis gets bolted to the spine. This one is enormous, and it's easy to miss. In a fish, the pelvic fins are attached to a small bone floating loose in the body wall, connected to the vertebral column by nothing at all, which is fine underwater, because a fish's fins aren't pushing it forward, its body is. The fins just steer. But a walking animal drives itself forward by pushing against the ground with its hind legs, and a push is useless if there's nothing solid to transmit it into. Push against the ground with a leg that's connected to your body by soft tissue, and the leg simply moves. The body stays. So the pelvic girdle grew, expanded, and fused directly to the vertebral column through a set of specialized vertebrae called the sacrum. Now the hind limb pushes the pelvis pushes the sacrum pushes the spine, and the whole animal moves forward. That connection is what walking is. It's the moment the limbs stop being steering fins, and start being an engine. And you have it. Reach behind you. Find the two dimples above your buttocks, and you are touching the joint where your leg bones deliver their force into your spine. A joint that no fish has ever had. The ribs grow up. Broad, strong, overlapping, holding the guts off the ground and keeping the body from being crushed flat by its own weight. And the walk is terrible. The first tetrapods walked with a sprawling gait, limbs sticking out sideways from the body, like a salamander or a crocodile, so that each step requires the whole trunk to bend side to side. Notice what that motion actually is. It is the fish swimming stroke retained and redirected onto land. Lateral undulation, exactly as before, but now with feet at the corners, pushing against dirt instead of water. They didn't invent walking. They took swimming and put it on the ground, and it is a horribly expensive way to move, for a reason that deserves a name of its own. When the trunk bends laterally, it squeezes one side of the body and stretches the other, which means it compresses one lung while expanding the other. The air is just pushed from side to side inside the animal. You cannot run and breathe at the same time. This is carrier's constraint, and it is why a lizard sprints and bursts, and then stops, panting, unable to do both at once. It puts a hard ceiling on how long any sprawling animal can sustain activity, and it will take a very long time, and a complete redesign of the limbs, before any vertebrate gets around it. The animals in this chapter did not. They were slow, and they got tired, and they had to stop. 8.9 Learning to breathe. Having a lung is not the same as knowing how to fill it. Watch a frog's throat. It pulses constantly in and out. That isn't a heartbeat and it isn't nerves. That's the frog breathing, and it is doing it in a way you would find impossible. A frog cannot suck air in. It has no diaphragm, and its ribs can't expand its chest. So it does this instead. It drops the floor of its mouth, drawing air in through its nostrils. Then it shuts its nostrils, and shoves the air down into its lungs by pushing the floor of its mouth upward. It doesn't inhale. It swallows air, under positive pressure, gulp by gulp. This is buccal pumping, inherited straight from air-gulping fish, and it works, but only just. The volume you can move is limited by the size of your mouth, and the whole rhythm is awkward to coordinate with running. The alternative, the one you're using right now, is to expand the rib cage, drop the pressure inside the chest, and let the atmosphere push air in. Suction breathing. It scales beautifully with body size, and it doesn't fight with locomotion. But that requires a rib cage engineered as a bellows, and that is a later invention, and it belongs to chapter 9. The animals in this chapter were stuck with the gulp, and so they cheated through the skin. Amphibian skin is thin, wet, glandular, and richly supplied with blood, and gases diffuse straight through it. A frog sitting in a damp hollow is absorbing oxygen across its entire body surface, continuously, without moving a muscle. It works so well that one whole family of salamanders, the plethodontids, which happen to be the majority of all salamander species on Earth, have thrown their lungs away entirely. No lungs, None. They breathe through their skin and the lining of their mouths. And that is all. An animal in the tetrapod lineage, the lineage defined by having lungs, evolved a body so good at breathing through its skin that it discarded the organ this entire chapter has been about. And the gills go. Mostly. An adult frog has none, but a tadpole does. And the axolotl famously keeps its feathery external gills for its whole adult life, staying a larva forever in a body that reproduces, a trick called neoteny. But the arches that held those gills are not thrown out. They never are. Chapter 7 showed you the front gill arch becoming a jaw. The arches behind it are, right now, in the process of becoming the hyoid bone in your throat, the cartilages of your voice box, and, in a transformation so improbable that it deserves the entire opening of a later chapter, the bones inside your ear. Nothing gets thrown away. It just gets used for something else. 8.102 loops. Chapter 7 left the fish heart with a design flaw. Blood goes, heart, gills, body, heart. One loop. And squeezing through the fine capillaries of the gills costs so much pressure that blood arrives at the body oxygen-rich but exhausted, drifting rather than driving. Underwater, weightless, that's survivable. On land it is not. Gravity pulls blood downward into the legs, and it has to be forced back up. Holding up your own body costs energy. Walking costs energy, and energy requires oxygen delivered hard. Air breathing offers the way out, and the reason is almost embarrassingly simple. The lung is inside the body, and the heart can reach it. Gills are on the outside, at the end of the line, but a lung is a discrete internal organ sitting right next to the heart, which means the heart can send blood to the lung, get it back, and pump it a second time. That is double circulation, and it's two loops sharing one pump. The pulmonary loop, heart lungs back to the heart. The systemic loop, heart body back to the heart. The blood is repressurized after being oxygenated. It leaves the heart for the body at full force, freshly loaded, driving hard. The pressure problem is solved. Except the amphibian only solves it halfway. And here's the wrinkle. The amphibian heart is three-chambered. 2 atria, one receiving used blood from the body, one receiving fresh blood from the lungs, but only one ventricle. Which means both blood streams pour into the same pumping chamber. They mix. The blood sent out to the body is not fully oxygenated. It's a blend. Amphibians have clever workarounds, ridges inside the ventricle and a spiral valve in the outflow, that keep the two streams from fully blending and steer them, imperfectly, toward the right destinations. And because so much of their oxygen comes in through the skin, the used blood coming back from the body isn't as used as you'd think, but it's a compromise, and compromises have ceilings. Mixed blood means a lower metabolic rate, less stamina, and a hard limit on how active an animal can be. Fixing this, building a wall down the middle of the ventricle, splitting the heart into two entirely separate pumps beating side by side, is a project that will take another 200 million years, and it will be finished independently. Twice, once in the birds, and once in the mammals. Put your hand on your chest. What you're feeling is the completed version. A 4-chambered heart, 2 pumps in one organ, one for the lungs, and one for the body, hermetically separate, never mixing. That is the end of a road that starts here, in a frog. 8.11 The Amphibian Bargain. Amphibian means both lives, and the word is more honest than it looks. Modern amphibians, the frogs, the salamanders, and the caecilians, limbless, burrowing, nearly blind, and utterly bizarre, are real land animals. They walk, they hunt, they breathe air. Some of them live in trees. Some of them survive freezing solid. And every last one of them is still tied to the water by 2 problems this chapter could not solve. Problem 1, the skin. The skin is thin, wet, and permeable, and it has to be, because that permeability is how a substantial fraction of the animal's oxygen gets in. But permeability doesn't discriminate. A skin that lets oxygen and lets water out. An amphibian, sitting in dry air, is evaporating. It cannot stop. Its greatest respiratory asset is simultaneously a hole in its side that the world is draining it through. Which is why you find amphibians in wetlands, on damp forest floors, under logs, along stream banks, in burrows anywhere the air is wet enough to slow the leak. They cannot cross a desert. They cannot cross a dry plain. They cannot live where the water isn't. And it's the same permeability that makes them the first to die when a pond is polluted, and why biologists watch amphibian populations the way miners once watched canaries. The membrane that lets them breathe lets everything else in too. Problem 2, the egg. And this is the one that really matters. An amphibian egg is a naked ball of cytoplasm and a coat of jelly. It has no shell. It has no waterproof membrane. It has no internal water supply. Lay it in dry air and it is dead within hours. It simply dries out. So amphibian eggs must be laid in water, or in a place so wet it might as well be, and that single fact dictates the entire shape of an amphibian's life. Eggs in the pond, a tadpole with gills, swimming, a fish in all but ancestry metamorphosis, in which the animal rebuilds itself from the inside out, growing legs, resorbing the tail, replacing gills with lungs, an adult that can leave the water. And then, when it is time to breed, that adult must go back. Every spring, on the first warm wet night, in woods all over the temperate world, thousands of frogs and salamanders come out of the leaf litter and walk, sometimes for hundreds of meters over roads, through gardens in the rain, back toward the pond they were born in. They have no choice. Their eggs will not survive anywhere else. They can leave the water, but they can never leave it behind. That is the amphibian bargain, and it is the honest end point of this chapter. These animals solve terrestrial locomotion. They solve terrestrial breathing. They did not solve terrestrial reproduction. They conquered the land the way a swimmer conquers the shore. They can get out. They can walk around on it. And they must always come back. 8.12 What was left? Look at what the water handed us. Lungs, inherited from a fish gulping air in a stagnant Devonian swamp, 400 million years ago, and never given back. Arms and legs, one bone, two bones, many bones, laid down in the fin of a fish that used them to push through weeds. Fingers invented underwater, in an animal too weak to stand, that was still breathing through gills. A neck, grown by an ambushed predator lying flat on the bottom of a swamp, so it could snap sideways at something swimming past. Not one of these things was made for the job it now does. Every single one was already there, built for something else, waiting. And then a lineage of these animals began to spend more and more time in the shallows, and then on the banks, and then in the leaf litter of the first forests, hunting insects that had never in their history been hunted by anything with a backbone. And the whole terrestrial world was right there, unguarded, uncontested, and green. But it stopped at the water's edge. Because of an egg with no shell, that dries out in an afternoon, and that chains every generation of every amphibian back to the pond, forever. The vast interiors of the continents, the plains, the uplands, the deserts, the mountains, everywhere the rain was unreliable, were closed. Not by cold, not by predators, not by food. By a drop of water that wouldn't stay put. Somewhere in the swamps of the Carboniferous, a lineage of tetrapods began to solve it. And the solution was not to give up on water at all. It was to bring the pond along. A private ocean, sealed in a shell with its own water, its own food, its own waste dump, and its own atmosphere, a self-contained pond, laid on dry ground, in which an embryo could go through every stage of development, in water. With no water anywhere in sight. The amniotic egg. It is the single most consequential structure in the history of terrestrial life, and it opened the continents. That is Chapter 9.